Welcome back, everyone. This is a redo of the one I've done earlier that was much longer. Trying to shorten these down so it's a little bit more compressed and you're getting a lot more out of it in the shorter time frame, because not everyone wants to listen to my voice for a long period of time. If you do enjoy this, please subscribe. We've got a lot more videos coming up, particularly on different fishing rigs and so forth. Heaps of content on its way, but first we'll fix this one up and move along as quick as I can. So this is looking at the best times to fish. So we're taking into account moon, tide, sun, weather, and various other factors to try and gauge what is the best time, including the best places to fish, because it's not just where to fish, but when to fish. Those are the sort of contents we'll cover. I'm not going to go through too much of that to keep it short, but there are some really interesting facts that I picked up as I was going through some of this, which I'll try and point out as some good points. So the main concept of this thing is called Solunar fishing. You don't really need to know too much about all this, but basically that they use it to predict or help predict behaviour and feeding patterns. So they discovered the sun and the moon and the tides are the greatest effect on fishing habits and how best to use those to increase your chances. So the cycles of the moon, and most of us are more than likely aware that the two best times to fish are generally full moon and new moon. Those are the two main ones we see. These are the varying cycles, but those are the two major moons that we focus on to look for fishing. But they aren't the only ones, as we'll look at in a minute, because there are four periods, two majors and two minors, so that affect when the fishing, possible fishing chances around. So the major, there are two of them. They last around 2 hours. So that's when the moon's directly above you, called the lunar transit, and moon directly below you. So on the other side of the earth, directly on the other side. The minor only lasts an hour while the moon rises and sets. So that's sunset, sunrise. So that's why we fish during those times. Which means that those majors, it means you don't just fish during the middle of the night when the moon's full up right above you, and also means you can also fish during the day, but you'll still get active fishing. They become more active during these times over others, and they're more active during the majors than the minors. Now, the concept of the full moon and the new moon, this is where we call what they call spring tides and what they call neap tides. So spring times is where the moon so the new moon is basically where it's blocking the sun out, and this is where you're going to want to fish where you're fishing more often where you're going to get more fish during the daytime, because at night there's less light from the moon, and fish won't be as active during that period. So day fishing, or closer to those sort of time frames, as in closer to sunset, not dark, and sunrise, but not completely dark, you're going to have better fishing, but you're also going to have fishing during the day, during those major and minor times. Full moon is on the opposite end of the scale, where you get the alignment with the sun, and you're going to have better fishing at night time, when the fish can see better, and they'll fish more often later into the night than they would if it was a new moon. So it gives you an idea of what you're looking at. Now, spring tides, they're when the moon's pulling the water in a particular direction, and that's when you get highest of the high tides. So that's why sometimes you'll see tides where they don't reach their fullest, and they're called not neap tides, they're neap tides, spelled with a P. is where it doesn't quite reach its fullest, and that happens when the moon is in different position, like when it's out here. I've got another side, this shows it much better. So as it rotates around, so spring tide, you can see where the moon is pulling the water in the direction. So you're going to have spring tide in these locations. And spring tide means you have the lowest low tide but the highest high tide. Neap tide is when you're in these positions where the water is pulled in the opposite directions, and you're going to have a lower high tide but a higher low tide. So that's the difference between the two. So new moon, you're going to have spring tide, full moon, spring tide. So biggest high tides, and when you got the moon halfway between is where you get the neap tide, so halfways. So you're still going to catch fish during those periods if you pick the right time frames, but once again, just gives you an idea of tides. So this is just a quick little example. As you can see, as the moon rotates around, you can see what happens with the tidal floods. And this is important with the tides. The reason why we go at high tide is because, like this is just a leaf, but if you imagine it being a fish, when the high tide comes in, fish come in towards closer to the beach, which means those casting off are going to have higher chance of catching fish because fish come closer in to feed closer in as food source comes closer in. So that's why we fish high tides generally better. But change of tide is also great because at change of tides, fish are more active during changes. Okay. This is a nice little table explaining tides and those when I mentioned about the varying phases of majors and minors. So you're looking at moonrise, sunsets. You can see the tidal patterns happening here. If you want, you can pause on this page and have a little more of a read. I don't want to sit here and talk about it all the way through. You can sort of see some of this. So this is showing you when the moon's above you. So that's spring tide, and you can see a sunrise. So that'd be when it's at its fullest, right above you. So it's going to create the biggest tidal patterns here. Sunrise, and that's when the moon goes down, and you can see the lowest tide point here. And on the opposite end of the scale, so in the middle of the day, when the moon's on the opposite side of the world to us, it's actually going to create another tidal pattern. So this would be where your other point of fishing might be, where it's during the day, you still might catch fish. So just sunrise, sunset isn't the only time. So this explains why that is the case and why we look at tide times. Sunrise, sunset effect, I think we've already covered this. So essentially, they become more active before the dawn, and they typically continue through to sunrise before resting. Sunset, similar, they feed at dusk before resting during the night. Those are also affected during the new moon and full moon. So those times can change depending on that. But that's the general consensus. This is an interesting one. Your barometric pressure reading can affect fish feed, and they actually can sense pressure. So they actually will feed or become more active if, depending on the pressure levels. I've got a gauge here to the side that actually tells you if you've got a rising pressure, it's improving pressure, improving weather, and this is what you should be targeting. So pause it here if you want to have a quick read through this. This is a gauge, so you can look at your barometer, look at your weather patterns and say you can see where you sit, and if you're sitting in a bad zone and everything else isn't matching up, it's not a great time to go fishing. So this helps indicate one of the other factors you want to look at. So you're trying to aim for things where either it's stable, so it's normal activity, rising where it's normal, but if you really want to go hard, then you're looking for where we got, so the degrading where this is the best time to fish, so falling pressure. so they fish more actively. So that's your best time to fish. But you've got moderate activities, normal activity, but it slows down during these time frames, so that's when you don't want to fish. And moving quickly along, so weather conditions, this is just explaining, it sort of explains a little bit about that pressure that I was talking about. So clear skies, so when it's bright and sunny, it's great for us, but fish go deeper and they take shade if they can in areas of debris and reef and so forth. So sometimes you got to go deeper and further to get them. In fair conditions, it's normal. Cloudy and rainy, that often makes fish less active. This is not, by and large, guaranteed. It just is a consensus, or what most people feel is the effect. So, hey, you might get lucky and you might get fish. Before a storm is known to be the best times for fishing, as they feel that pressure change and they actively feed before. So they can feed right out the storm, and after the storm, they get moving again, increasing your odds. So those are the times to target. And when it's nice conditions, try and go for when it's fair, so you can get at least some sort of normal conditions, and combine that with a great location, and you should have at least some good chance. If not, go for these times, and also aim for the full and new moon. Wind has a little bit to do with it. So stirring up a wind, this is mainly due to freshwater stuff, not mostly with sole. Wind blows food into water sources and encourages food and fish in that direction. So you can look at this if you're interested more in freshwater sources, not so much for salt water. The wind only affects the choppiness of salt water, which can affect predatory fish, and also the way the waves crash in. So that's, and obviously casting. So that's the only issue with wind for fishing for salt. So summary, best time of day, look at the phases of the moon, the gravitational pull, particularly when more moon is it's closest to the earth, the bigger the tides, the more the pull the fish are in, the best. So new moon and full moon, as I mentioned. And during your two major and minor periods, as mentioned before, during tidal changes, those are good ones. And those majors, particularly if they coincide with sunrise, sunset, look at those. Here's the little copy of the lunar cycle for us here in us WA, to give you an idea of where it sets, so you can go where my new moon sits and at what date. So you can go, I'm sitting around here, so this is roughly when my full moon is going to be, so I'm going to have good fishing then. New moon's going to be here, so that's when I want to fish during the day. So that's pretty much it. This was just rehashed from a previous example of gutters and holes, and I thought I'd just leave that there if you wanted to pause on that if you missed on the other video. I'll put a link just to reference that if you want to know how to find places that are best going to produce fish. I'll add that link in there as well. So that should be enough for covering that as short as I can and as quick as I can. And if you want the longer version with more detail, just jump across to the other link. But thanks for listening, guys, and tight lines.